So I don't know if you can see through the back window or not, but I have a tree back there. I've been cutting limbs for the deer this morning. And yes, tree. Not limbs, but a tree. Cut about a 20-foot sugarberry down. The deer absolutely love those limbs. They're small. They seem to have a lot of moisture in it for them. And I guess they're tender and they're probably sweet, but they really seem to like them.
Is my door not shut?
Alright. So, I tried recording this earlier. My camera died. This one looks like it's going to die too. So, we'll see if we can get through this. But I wanted to talk to you about bear with me one second, I'm making a turn here. I wanted to talk to you guys today about supplemental feeding, you know, protein, corn, whatever you use. Should you use it? When do you use it? If you're gonna use it, that kind of stuff. So, as most managers will tell you, there's not a cookie cutter, one solution fits all kind of scenario for each piece of property. So where we hunt, it's really thick. The bucks don't come in there until September, when they start getting hard horn, between the 15th and the 21st typically. Last year it was around the 21st when we started getting pictures of them. And that's when I would start feeding. Maybe a week before, I'm expecting them to be hard horn. And reason for that for me is it doesn't make sense to feed them all summer because they're not even there. It's going to be hogs eating it, maybe a doe here and there. But as far as the deer that we're going to hunt, they're not going to be there. So I'd be wasting money. Feed would be going bad and just not a good idea. Now, if you've got a piece of property that's got big open spots, the deer stay there all the time, then it might be worthwhile to feed during the summer. But remember, deer do shift their patterns from season to season. They're going to shift from summer to kind of the fall or hunting season in September. They'll shift their pattern again in probably November, into November, going into December, when you're starting to go into winter months. Hunter's being extremely loud in case you can't hear him. Okay, I'm trying it on my phone now because that camera died. So we can try to finish this up. We'll see. But like I was saying, you know, for me it doesn't make sense because I don't have the deer there and they have those pattern shifts. I think it's kind of funny. I see guys on Facebook posting about, oh, look at this big buck, I've never seen him before. I've got pictures of him right now. Yeah, you got pictures of him right now, but when that shift comes, who's to say he's going to stay there? More than likely, he's going to move on. He's going to go to another area. That's not to say all of them do that, but most of your bucks are going to have their core areas they're going to shift into during the fall and the rut times. That is typically 3/4 to a mile, maybe 2 miles from where they're at. And I think I was watching a video the other day, said some studies show they would even travel as far as up to 5 miles. So just because you see him now does not mean you're going to see him later on. We're kind of driving around the field. I was going to look at where I was going to make that food plot and completely spaced out a second ago, so we're going to make another lap. But let's talk about if you do decide to feed. So we do feed because of the time of year we do it in the fall. A deer's stomach can handle more corn that time of year because they're used to going into the fields and eating that. So that's what I use. I don't waste my money on the protein feeds like I feed my deer in the pens. Also, because of the hogs I've got on the property, it's cheaper for me to use just regular corn in case the hogs do get into it. So that's something you need to think about. Are you going to use like a high protein feed? Are you going to use just corn? Or maybe you've got something else you use that I haven't thought about. Maybe just straight soybeans. I guess that's an option. Yeah, this has grown up a lot. I'm going to have to spray and brush hog this again. But that being said, how are you going to feed it? So I've tried different types of feeders. I've tried spin casts. I've tried the protein feeders. I've tried building my own PVC ones. I've tried building my own out of wood that hang on the side of trees. For me, I found the best method because it seems to be the most natural. It's just dumping it straight onto the ground. And that works for me. And the way I do that is I go in middle of the day when I know the deer aren't going to be there, and that's when I drop it. If I'm going to hunt that evening, especially like during the rut, then I'll drop it right before I climb into my stand, as long as there's no deer in the field already. If you're going to use like a high capacity protein feeder, then or even a spin cast for that matter, then you've got to think about how you're going to fill that up. How, you know, if you're filling it up with a four-wheeler or a truck, can you access it where you're wanting to put it? So you've got to take that kind of stuff into consideration. Are you going to have to lug in a whole lot of bags of corn or bags of protein into that area and by hand, and you're going to get yourself wore out, and then after a while you're not going to want to mess with it, and it's going to be a waste of time. I mean, that's something to think about. And then also, so let's take the rut into consideration. So for the rut, I only will put out the feed right before I climb in the stand when I've verified there's not a deer there, because in the rut we know they move all times of day. So just saying, oh, I'm going to go at 10 o'clock every day to fill it up doesn't always work, because there could be a deer there at 10 o'clock during the rut. So you've got to take that into consideration. Is this going to, if you're using a big feeder and you need to fill it up with 500 pounds of feed every time you fill it up, can you get 500 pounds of feed there during the rut? If you can't, maybe that's something to think about, you know, or maybe you stop feeding during the rut. I would advise it against that, but you know, maybe that's your plan. I don't know. That's totally up to you. And then, you know, what type of there's other types of feeders that you can use. You know, there's the ones like cattle farmers use, the bunk feeders. If you're going to build one, I've seen them built out of wood. I would say put it 18 inches to 20 inches off the ground. That's going to keep it out of hog reach. I would anchor it if you have hogs in your area. And then if you're going to put a roof on it, take into consider antler, you know, their antler reach. I'd put a roof 6 to 7 foot off of the ground. That way you know you're clearing any antlers. So, you know, there's a lot to consider when you start talking about, you know, feeding. It's all going to depend on what you're trying to accomplish, what capabilities your property has. So, you know, make sure you take all that stuff into consideration. And then also, you know, is the neighbor feeding, where your feed may not be as beneficial, and maybe putting out something else instead of some feed would be beneficial for you. You know, you want it to work with the patterns you try to develop with their food, you know, with the food plots you put out. I mean, if you've got a stand on a ridge and it's on the travel corridor, and you just go, and then all of a sudden you start dumping corn there. I mean, I've seen it work in the past in some cases, and in some cases it completely freaks the deer out because they're not used to a whole bunch of food being there, and now all of a sudden there is, and it doesn't seem right to them, so they won't use it. They'll change their patterns for a little bit. So you know, take that kind of stuff into consideration. Just don't go, I'm going to go dump 500 pounds of feed in this area in a feeder, and the deer are going to absolutely go crazy about it. It's going to take time. But like I said, you want to have that in place before those pattern shifts. If you're hunting like I am, where I've got thick property, I know they're not going to come in there until they're hard antlered, until they're doing that shift. If they're there all the time, I would get those feeders out now. I mean, but it completely goes with what you're trying to accomplish, the property that you've got, and there's a lot of factors to take into consideration for that. You know, if you have any questions about that, want, you know, maybe some help on do you want to use feed or not, you know, put a comment down and I'll be happy to reach out to you. I hope you have a good evening.